All right, ready to dive in. Today, it's workplace dynamics, but we're looking at it through learning English, business English, that is.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we got this educational English podcast episode, and it focuses on two managers trying to deal with an employee who's, well, not really doing so well.
Underperforming.
Exactly. And get this, he's one of the manager's cousins.
Oh, wow. Talk about a tricky situation. Family in the workplace can be complicated. Boundaries get blurred. Loyalties tested. It's a recipe for drama.
Isn't it? I mean, think about it. How do you even begin to give constructive feedback when you're worried about Thanksgiving dinner?
Right. So we're going to learn some juicy English phrases along the way, too.
Oh, absolutely. This podcast is full of them. They use unreliable to describe this employee, Jason. They even compare him to those trains that are always late.
I can just picture it, Jason strolling in late again, like clockwork. I bet those comparisons really help English learners grasp the meaning,
Yeah.
especially when they're trying to, make their language more vivid and impactful.
It's true. They don't just teach the word, they make it stick. And it's not just about being unreliable either. Jason's productivity is, well, let's just say it needs a boost. Apparently, he's more interested in MSN and Facebook than, actual work.
Ah, the classic social media time suck. We've all been there, haven't we? But I guess when it starts affecting your work ethic, that's where the problems begin.
And that's a big part of what this podcast episode explores: work ethic, how it's perceived, especially in English-speaking workplaces, what it means to really be seen as a reliable, contributing member of the team.
Oh, I bet that's insightful for English learners. Work culture can be so different across countries. What might be considered perfectly acceptable in one place could be a major faux pas in another.
You're so right. So they define work ethic in this podcast, but they also talk about the role of a manager as a coach, how managers are supposed to guide their team members. But how do you do that when the underperforming employee is family?
Right. That's the dilemma facing Jeff, the other manager in this scenario. It's like he's caught between a rock and a hard place.
Mm.
On one hand, he's got to address Jason's poor performance, but on the other, he has to navigate the delicate family dynamics with Lauren, Jason's cousin.
And it's not just about what he says to Jason, it's about how he manages Lauren's expectations, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a whole other layer of complexity. And I bet that's where those business English phrases come in handy. I mean, how do you deliver criticism without, causing a family rift?
Well, that's what I love about this podcast. They actually introduce some really useful phrases for just that kind of situation. Things like bottom line or overall.
Hmm. Those are good ones. They allow you to be direct, but in a more diplomatic way. So instead of saying, Jason, you're messing up, you could say, overall, there are some areas where we need to see improvement, Jason.
Yeah.
It softens the blow.
Yeah, it's all about finding the right tone. And I think that's where mastering business English can be so crucial. It's not just about knowing the words, it's about understanding those subtle nuances of how they're used in a professional context.
Exactly. And how those nuances can change depending on who you're talking to, what you're trying to achieve. It's fascinating. But it sounds like poor Jeff has a lot more to navigate than just finding the right words.
He does. He's got to find a way to address Jason's performance while also keeping Lauren happy. Talk about a high wire act. And I'm curious to see how they unpack that in the podcast.
Me too. It'll be interesting to see what kind of communication strategies they suggest for dealing with those kinds of tricky situations. I mean, we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Where personal relationships intersect with our professional lives.
Oh, for sure. So this is definitely a deep dive that's going to hit close to home for a lot of people.
Definitely. And with a good dose of English learning thrown in. What more could you ask for? It's like he needs to walk this tightrope, keep everyone happy, but still, get the job done.
Exactly. And that's where those phrases like bottom line come in handy.
Yeah, using the language of business
Mm.
to sort of depersonalize the situation. Look, Lauren, you might say, the bottom line is we need Jason to step up.
Oh, that's good. It's like he's appealing to her logic, not her emotions, trying to keep things professional, even though it's, well, deeply personal.
Right. And I bet that resonates with English learners too, especially those working in international business. Is like, how do you navigate those cultural differences in communication? When to be direct, when to be more subtle?
It makes me think of that time, when I was working with that team in Japan.
Oh yeah, what happened?
Well, I was so focused on being efficient, getting things done. I was probably a little too blunt, a little too direct with my feedback.
Indeed.
Well, let's just say it didn't go over so well. They were very polite, of course, but I could tell I'd stepped on some toes.
That makes sense. Directness can be tricky, can it? What might be seen as, assertive and efficient in one culture can be perceived as aggressive or disrespectful in another.
Exactly. It was a real learning experience. After that, I had to really pay attention to like their nonverbal cues, the way they phrased things.
So you started to pick up on those more subtle forms of communication.
Yeah, I had to. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. And honestly, it made me a better communicator overall, more attuned to like the whole picture, not just the words.
That's a fantastic point. Learning a language for business, it's not just about the words themselves. It's about understanding the culture, the context, the unspoken rules.
Yep, absolutely. And for our listener out there who's maybe, on their own journey to mastering business English, what advice would you give them besides listening to this podcast, of course?
Well, I'd say immerse yourself. Listen to as much authentic English as you can.
Yeah.
Podcasts, business news, even movies and TV shows.
Yeah, good idea. And don't just passively listen. Actively engage. Like, pay attention to how people use language, how they structure their sentences.
Right. Pick up on those little things, the tone of voice, the pauses, the expressions they use.
And don't be afraid to practice, even if it feels awkward at first. The more you use the language, the more comfortable you'll become.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's part of the learning process.
Yeah, I've made plenty of them. But honestly, those are the times when you learn the most. You figure out what works, what doesn't work, and you get better.
Exactly. It's all about that growth mindset, right?
Hmm.
Embracing the challenges, seeing those mistakes as opportunities to improve.
For sure. So, to our listener, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, just remember, take it one step at a time, focus on those small wins, and celebrate your progress. Because honestly, even a little bit of progress can make a big difference in your confidence and your ability to communicate effectively.
Well said. And what strikes me about this whole deep dive is how we started with this specific case of Jason, the underperforming employee,
Hmm.
but the conversation has really expanded to something much bigger.
I know, right? It's about more than just one person or one situation. It's about how we communicate in the workplace, how we navigate those tricky interpersonal dynamics.
Exactly. And that's something everyone can relate to, regardless of their language level or their job title. Because let's face it, we all have to deal with those difficult conversations sometimes, whether it's giving feedback, setting boundaries, or just trying to get your point across.
Thinking about it now, there's this interesting connection between Jason's struggles with productivity and this idea of like cultural awareness and empathy in communication.
Oh, tell me more. How do you see those connected?
Well, I think it all comes back to perspective, right? Just like Jason might not fully understand the expectations of his workplace, we all have these blind spots, these assumptions we make based on our own experiences and our own culture, and that can lead to miscommunication, conflict, all sorts of problems.
That's such a valuable insight, and I think it's something that often gets overlooked in business English learning. We focus so much on the technical aspects of language, the grammar, the vocabulary, but we forget about the human element, the importance of understanding where the other person is coming from, what their values and priorities might be.
Exactly. And that's why I think this deep dive has been so valuable, because it's not just about learning new words or phrases. It's about developing those soft skills, that cultural intelligence that can help you communicate more effectively, build stronger relationships, and ultimately, be more successful in whatever you do.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm sure our listeners are getting a lot out of this.
Oh, for sure. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious to explore some specific strategies for those tricky conversations. Like, what do you do when you have to give feedback to someone who's not pulling their weight, especially when there are family dynamics involved?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm ready to tackle that challenge. All right, let's dive into those tricky conversations, those situations where you need to give feedback, but oh boy, things are a little complicated.
Yeah, like when you have to tell your coworker their performance isn't cutting it, but they also happen to be, I don't know, your boss's nephew or something.
Oh, exactly. Talk about walking on eggshells. So what do you do? How do you approach those conversations?
Well, first of all, deep breaths. Don't panic. Remember, it's not about attacking the person, it's about addressing the behavior.
Right. Keep it professional, focus on the facts, those specific examples of where they're falling short.
Yeah, and this is where those business English phrases can be really helpful. Using expressions like bottom line or overall, it kind of helps to create that distance. Like talking about the situation objectively, not making it personal.
Yeah, like, Jason, overall, we need to see improvement in your time management skills. It sounds less accusatory, right?
Way less.
Yep.
And it keeps the focus on the work, which is what matters. But also, I think it's important to be mindful of your tone.
Oh, absolutely. Tone is everything. You don't want to come across as condescending or judgmental.
No, you want to be firm but fair. And I think framing it as like you're trying to help them succeed can be really effective.
Yeah, like, I'm giving you this feedback because I want to see you thrive in this role. Something like that.
Right. It shows that you're invested in their development, not just trying to tear them down. And when it comes to those family ties, those extra layers of complexity, well, honesty can be a good policy sometimes.
Honesty.
Yeah, like acknowledge the elephant in the room. Lauren, I know Jason's your cousin, and I respect that. But from a purely professional standpoint, something along those lines.
Oh, interesting. So you're not ignoring the relationship. You're addressing it head on.
Right. Because pretending it doesn't exist isn't going to help. And honestly, Lauren might even appreciate you being upfront about it. It shows you're taking her perspective into account, too.
It's like you're saying, I see you, I hear you, but here's the reality of the situation.
Exactly. And I think that kind of transparency can go a long way in building trust, even in their super awkward situations. But, no matter how well you handle the conversation, there's always a chance it's not going to go perfectly.
Oh, for sure. Some people just aren't receptive to feedback, no matter how constructively you frame it.
That's true. And sometimes you just got to accept that. But even if you don't get the outcome you hoped for, at least you know you approached it with like professionalism and respect.
Absolutely. And you've learned something from the experience, which is always valuable. So for our listener who might be facing a similar situation, my advice would be prepared. Think through what you want to say, how you want to say it.
Practice those tricky phrases. And remember, it's okay to take your time. You don't have to have all the answers right away.
Right. It's
No,
okay to say, let me think about that and get back to you. Sometimes a little bit of space can help everyone approach the situation more calmly and rationally.
for sure. And hey, even if the conversation doesn't go exactly as planned, you've shown that you're willing to have those tough conversations, which is a valuable skill in itself.
Absolutely. It shows leadership, maturity, and a commitment to clear communication.
And what's been so great about this deep dive is that we've gone beyond just, dissecting vocabulary or grammar. We've really delved into the human side of business English, how language intersects with culture, psychology, those everyday workplace challenges that we all face.
It's been a real journey, hasn't it? And I think our listener is walking away with some really practical tools and insights to navigate those tricky waters.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, keep pushing yourself to become a more confident and effective communicator. Because at the end of the day, it's those communication skills that can really make or break your success, not just in the workplace, but in life.
So true. And who knows, maybe our next deep dive will uncover even more fascinating insights into the world of language and communication.
I can't wait. Until
Good
next
evening.
time, happy communicating, everyone.